So first of all, in welcoming you back, I would like to thank our silver partners. So that would be CPB, Arup, and Downer. And I'd also like to thank our session partner for this session, which is GH&D. Now, I'm particularly excited to introduce this session because I am very lucky to be responsible for writing the Brisbane 2032 Legacy Strategy. So I'm about to get some free consulting from our guest experts, which I'll be taking plenty of notes, and hopefully some of the things that you have to impart today will make it into the end strategy, just to put some extra pressure on you. I'd therefore really like to invite to the stage, and we've got a little bit of logistics for these three to make their way to the stage. So if you would like to take your time, let me introduce to the stage for this session Simon Ancliffe, who is the Executive Director of Movement Strategies at GH&D, the legendary Dr. Bridie Keane, Lecturer in Public Health at the University of the Sunshine Coast, and then Kimberly Camras, Director of Climate Positive Brisbane 2032 and Climate Futures, Department of Environment and Science. So they're going to make their way to the stage, and I would just like to let you know a little bit about our first speaker. So I had never met our first speaker beforehand, but we both come from London, so that's a really good start. And our first speaker was also involved not just in the London Olympics, but in his own words, many, many Olympic Games, many other major events, Commonwealth Games, but he's also been involved in hospitals, universities, schools, power stations, and anywhere where there are people, including major events like this one today. So it's my great pleasure to be able to welcome our first speaker to share some of his experience, which might range from Glastonbury to Mecca, because I know you have an extensive range of experiences to share. Simon Ancliffe.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much for that introduction. So my experience is in people movement and crowd dynamics. So my task in the first, or in this 15-minute session, is to say why is it that people movement is important for sustainability, particularly in the context of mega events and legacy. It is more important that we focus on legacy than the event itself. But my goal in the 15 minutes is to say why the lessons that we've learned from planning for mega events around the world apply to other disciplines and apply to generating a sustainable future. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you the London Olympic Park at the bid stage. So this was 2006, so 6 years in advance. And the purpose of this master plan and the Olympic Park was to provide a sustainable future for the East End of London, an area that was hugely underdeveloped, very poor and badly polluted and otherwise suffering. And it wasn't about a platform for the Games at all. The Mayor was quite explicit on that. And in terms of the park there, I'm going to draw your attention to a few features of it. In the sort of top left, or the nearest bottom left, you can see the baseball diamond. You can see a couple of hockey pitches on the left side of the river, and you can see 3 bridges across that river, and then also a sort of rather fancy Olympic stadium in the rear of the picture. However, this was the park as it approached completion. You might be able to see a Westfield in the background, just emerging, a Westfield shopping centre, which became the biggest in Western Europe. There's also an athletes' village, and in front of the athletes' village there's a white cube, which is a temporary basketball venue. There's also a velodrome in front of that. The hockey pitches have moved to the right, and the Olympic Stadium has changed its format as well. There's also only 2 bridges, not 3. That 3rd bridge was removed solely because of crowd flow. It showed that we didn't need it. But all aspects of that park were affected by crowd flow. And I'm going to show a bit more from this angle. And you can see next to the stadium there are 2 bridges. They're sort of grey and orangey colour. And those 2 bridges represent, or those 2 elements represent, a temporary and permanent aspects to those bridges. And the middle of those bridges, the one sort of beyond the red orbit, is called Sculpture. That was originally 140 metres wide. So imagine a bridge 140 metres wide, several times as wide as a pitch. And so that went down to about 40 metres as a result of crowd flow analysis again. And the division between temporary and permanent was also a crowd flow requirement. And it was to service an athletics stadium. So if you can imagine the return on investment, the financial difference between having a 140-metre wide bridge and a 42-metre wide bridge, and think about the use of land that implies, and how it means that land is freed up for other purposes. The area, the sort of landscape that you can see leading down to the renovated canals, the amount of land is also, that was available for that was also driven by crowd flow. And so you can see that there's a number of big points from that. One is getting things the right size is fundamental to financial sustainability, but also environmental sustainability and land use. It's also important to do legacy and event planning at the same time. Otherwise, how can you make the decisions between temporary and permanent? How can you get the specification right for what you're trying to do in the long run? And of course, it's also changed. So we had the 2006 master plan, and then you can see in 2012 it's quite different. And that change continues. We're still building out the 2012 Olympic Park. We're still building the legacy that sits on the right bank at the moment, which is going to be a museum district. And so there is change up until the event and thereafter as well. And that's why you sort of think, well, I've got 10 years, that's lots of time. It's not lots of time. The test events will happen rather sooner. The decisions that need to be made in the planning phase need to happen in the next couple of years. So it's really important to do legacy and games at the same time. To give you an idea about some of the things we did to do that, one of this is, I don't normally show a chart in this kind of presentation, but this is the demand forecast for spectators during the different days of the Olympic Games. And you can see that there's a peak just there. So we could have designed to that, because in 2006, lots of things can change. So it might have been that the forecast had to become higher. It's also true that forecasts are forecasts, and anybody who's involved in this kind of business will know that forecasts are wrong. So you need to have a bit of margin for error. But it's going to be really expensive, like hundreds of millions of dollars to build to that forecast for 15 minutes of an Olympic Games. That's not what this is about. It's about legacy, not about the 15 minutes of the Games. So we could design to that. The problem is if we design to that level, which is sort of more value, good value engineering, then what happens if the forecast is higher? What happens if our forecast is wrong? We need to make sure it's safe, and we have to think about different design standards, different ways of dealing with our forecast being wrong with operational planning, or maybe we have to change our standards or have demand management kind of activities. And overall, that saved hundreds of millions of dollars, but also got the right solution for the environment and for the park for the future. And this is a crowd planning forecast, but it could be for it could certainly be for transport. It could be for many other things that you'll need to plan for an event and for legacy. It could be water use. So we need to think about that in great detail. And I know you will say, okay, well, it's Olympic Park. We're not doing an Olympic Park. We're doing a regional games with lots of small venues and existing venues. Existing venues do not work for Olympics. They have to be seriously refurbished and they have to be operated differently. And you have to think about the temporary and permanent elements of each of those. In London, it wasn't just about the Olympic Park. It was about venues all over London and indeed, hundreds of miles from London. So although it's Olympic Park focused, the lessons definitely still apply for a more regional games. So we've looked at the Brisbane venue cluster, for example, and that's going to have lots of venues in close proximity and fan parks and transport hubs. And so we need to think about how those will work and the pedestrian routes between them. The same is true in the Qatar World Cup that's happening at the moment. There are many stadia in a city. And so we're looking at the pedestrian route networks inside the city. And that planning for Doha is just being done now, quite late in the day. But and it's very difficult to get it right. I can promise you it's been a really difficult exercise planning for the last mile between venues and the transport hubs and vice versa. Because if those things aren't thought about, and they're usually not thought about, because people like to think about infrastructure, big infrastructure, not about the way things operate, not about the spaces in between. So it won't surprise you to know we've done a forecast for Brisbane already using information we've had from previous games. And this again is the spectator demand forecast, but we will have different forecasts for the VIPs and Olympic family, for media, for people with accessibility requirements, because those are very demanding. One thing I didn't talk about earlier was just the requirements to specify what you need in great detail. So when I looked at the Olympic Park, one of the things, in fact, I'll go back just to show you. You can see a security screening area on the sort of right of the photo beyond the aquatics with those temporary sort of wings on it. That was the largest security screening area anywhere in the world. When we started to design that, the sponsors wanted to use that land because it was perfect for photo shot across to the Olympic Stadium and the Orbit sculpture and the Aquatic Centre, so it was top revenue generating area. But the games were awarded on the 6th of July. We had the 7 July terrorist attacks in London, so security was an absolute requirement that we had to get right. But at that time, people didn't know what the technology was going to be. Is it going to be airport-style technology of magnetometers and X-ray machines, or is it going to be some new technology? And now there is new technology. Also, if it's going to be airport-style, people don't take as much stuff to games as they do to an airport. So is there a different ratio of X-ray machines and magnetometers? What about accessibility requirements? Most classically, if you're in a wheelchair, how do we deal with that? We need more space for that. There's also, what's the process going to be? And all those different things, transport, security, and accessibility, came together to get a specification for what we needed there. And that was called operability. And operability is difficult in the games because the people saying this is what we need to build aren't there because they're doing the previous games, in this case 2008 Beijing Olympics. And there's also no budget for those people to be employed 4 years out. But you do need to get a technical specification to know what you're going to build. And that applies for existing venues as well, because otherwise the land may be gone by the time you get there and you have to retrofit. So, and just on that, in the operability piece, we were really challenged on accessibility. It was going to be the most inclusive games ever, and was the most inclusive games ever. And a lot of the time, our accessibility consultant, who was very demanding, said, you can't do that, it's not good enough. And we go, well, tell us what we should do. And he said, I can't. And necessity had to be the mother of invention, and we did have to find ways. And that will be true for sustainability, I think, and many other disciplines. That sometimes if you've set a high bar, you do have to challenge yourself to keep on pushing that bar despite resistance to make sure that you get the best outcome possible. So back to that forecast for the South East Queensland Games, and we've got a transport forecast that starts to tell us how the different corridors are used. And it will be different for people with accessibility requirements, it will be different for media. And so we need to sort of use that to get the spec right for the future, and we need to do it now. So I'm coming up to time. So sustainable outcomes, you've got to get lots of things right. Do games and legacy planning at the same time. Do think about the technical things. They might seem small technical details, but they will make them work, make the games work or not, make legacy work or not, and make the balance between temporary and permanent and the financial impact of that and the land use and other aspects work. Manage peaks where you can. You don't always need to design to absolutely the highest standard, and right sizing will generate lots of money for you and lots of return. And 10 years is not too long. You've got to start yesterday for much of this stuff. So that's my time over, I think. Thanks very much. However, it does fall on me to introduce, I'm very happy to introduce Bridie Keane. She's an Australian Paralympic athlete with a passion for sports inclusion. Notably, she competed for Australia in the wheelchair basketball, winning a bronze medal at Beijing, and then captaining Australia to a silver medal, thank you, in London 2012 Paralympic Games. And since retiring from Olympic sport, Bridie's influence and involvement in disability sport continues across the spectrum of high performance to grassroots and inclusive community sport. She was nominated by Paralympics Australia to represent the athletics perspective in the successful bid, and since the bid was secured, Bridie became a member of the QAS board, providing the Paralympic perspective in the lead up to hosting a home games in 2032. Now she will chair the Sunshine Coast Council 2032 Games Community Reference Group, which will plan for how the Sunshine Coast can optimise what is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to host the home Olympic and Paralympic Games. Welcome, Bridie.
Thank you, Simon. I might go over to this side of the room so that we can sort of share it up. Wow. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which we're gathered today, the Kabi Kabi people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I, as you just heard, am a Sunshine Coast local, so it's pretty exciting to have all of you in the room today thinking about what we can create in terms of the 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And now that I know that Kate is here, I'm even more nervous because I feel like this has turned into a bit of a 10-minute pitch on why inclusion needs to stay at the top of the legacy document. So Let me know how I go, Kate. Today, I really want to share with you my story as a Paralympic athlete, and then what I've been doing since, particularly with the 2032 bid, and really what is at the centrepiece of that, which is my passion for inclusion, which has really underpinned every involvement that I've had in the 2032 Games process so far, which began by a very, very unique and huge opportunity that I did not take for granted, which was to represent Paralympics Australia as the Paralympic athlete in the bid to the IOC Future Host Commission, which was the most nerve-wracking presentation that I think I've ever done from my living room. I actually did it from the kitchen on Zoom, as many of us are now aware that is the way the world sort of worked for the last 2 years. And in my role as the Paralympic athlete, it was to really talk about what having a Paralympic Games would mean for Southeast Queensland. And what it meant for me personally was like all these things that had happened in my life coming together into this one opportunity to go, we can be the most accessible place in the universe, not just for sport, but just to be. And particularly here on the Sunshine Coast, we are a place that people want to come here for holidays. It is the most beautiful place in the world, I think, obviously biased, but we need to be the most accessible place as well. And that all stems up to my own experience of growing up with a disability in Australia and then discovering Paralympic sport. And it really changed my life and my opportunity to go on to represent Australia in wheelchair basketball, because I grew up in a school system where I didn't even have access to play sport like the other kids. I was in pain if I tried to play stand-up basketball, and it wasn't until we had Sydney 2000 Paralympic Games on our home doorstep that I went as a 13-year-old and I met a Paralympic superstar, Lisa Tesh, and she looked at me and she actually signed my prosthetic foot and she said, go home and play wheelchair basketball. And that was the game changer for me. It opened up a different world of wanting to actually participate in something that was for disabled people rather than quite literally hide my disability. And that is a common experience for people growing up with a disability in Australia and in Southeast Queensland, that they don't have sporting opportunities at school. And so that sort of became my passion project, to be involved in creating sporting opportunities on a really small scale. We brought wheelchair basketball into schools on the Sunshine Coast, and we got kids with and without disabilities to play wheelchair basketball together. And we were quite happy doing that in our little, corner of the world. And then this opportunity to present to the Future Host Commission came up, and I got to share experiences like that with the IOC and talk about what it would mean for people with a disability to actually have a Games here. So we got the Games, and it was amazing, and now I need to be true to my word and take every opportunity like this today to talk about why we need to grab this opportunity and just make every little bit count. And for me, it's probably more important having opportunities like this today than what we'll have in 4 or 5 years to talk about, what we should be doing. It's now that we need to be thinking about accessibility as we are planning for infrastructure, as we are planning for transport. And hearing Simon speak about London, and we had a meeting last week, it just brought back all the memories I have as an athlete, what it was like to experience London. And it was the most accessible Games. It was incredible. I even had a flashback then to going through the security, leaving the training venue and back to the village, and we just saw this most amazing sunset over London. Like, it just all comes flooding back how incredible a job London did. But we need to do so much better. In London, I travelled in the months prior to, I think it was about a year before the Games, I travelled with a good friend of mine who's a wheelchair basketball athlete as well, and she was in her wheelchair, and the two of us went around London, and we were a lot younger than we are now, and every time there was a tube station with stairs, we were like, this is not going to stop us. And so I would carry her wheelchair with my not great balance, and she would literally pull herself up the stairs, and we were like, it's not going to stop us from experiencing London. We now say we are too old to do that, but also we shouldn't have to do that. We just don't go to venues anymore that have barriers because we do not deserve to go through a back door. We don't deserve to go through the ramp around the back. We deserve to enter a building like everyone else. And when we got to London 12 months later and we saw the tube map, they had created tube stations that were accessible. So if London's tube system can become accessible for the Olympic and Paralympic Games, imagine what we can do when we're up here, for instance, on the Sunshine Coast. There are discussions about what types of transport we need in the southeast Queensland corner. We have the opportunity to create a legacy that is the most accessible place in the universe. And I am not going to stop in my journey for 2032 until I've had the opportunity to tell as many people as possible why this is so important. And when I talk about accessibility, what I really want people to think about is that universal design is really just the beginning. Think about, and I can resonate with this, if you are using a wheelchair and you go to a restaurant with a group, with your family and friends, and you can go to the restaurant, but you have to go through the back entrance. It's not the same experience. Think about if you are the Australian wheelchair rugby team and you go to a sporting venue and there is one shower that the entire team can use because a sporting venue built 10 regular non-accessible showers, but one accessible shower. Think about what that tells you compared to your able-bodied counterparts. So when I think about accessibility, I think about equity versus equality. Think about what a person with a disability would be experiencing of that venue. And if you wouldn't have the Olympic counterpart go to a change room with one accessible shower, then we cannot expect our Paralympic counterparts to do that. It is so much harder to make things accessible than to just have an inclusive design from the outset. It is amazing that we can add in ramps and we can make venues accessible, but what if we actually just made them barrier-free from the beginning? And so I guess in getting this opportunity today, I really encourage all of you who are in amazing positions to start to have these conversations about 2032, to just think about not just achieving universal design, but achieving the highest bar that we can, because come 2032, our part of the universe is on show, and we could actually move that bar to a much better place than it is now. Universal design is just the beginning, and I would really like to see a legacy where we become the most accessible place in the planet, and that when my kids are 10 and 12 at the Olympic and Paralympic Games, they don't even recognise venues that have where Chris, my partner, and I will have to use, an elevator if he's using his chair. Thinking about different ways that we can create the most barrier-free environment. And we won't always get it. We can't make it completely possible to have everyone use the same entrance, but from the outset, when we're building and creating things, if we can use the philosophy to encourage the most amount of people to use that venue, whether it be people who have sensory difficulties or physical disabilities, that is a really good starting point, and that's the role that I hope to play as we take this next step into the 10-year golden runway, as we say. Thank you.
Right here. It's my pleasure to also introduce Kimberly Camras, who's the Director, Climate Positive Brisbane 2032 within the Queensland Government's Department of Environment and Science. She heads a unit working across government and industry to not only realise the climate positivity and sustainability commitments for the Games, but also to catalyse cross-sectoral action. Kimberly is also completing a PhD in regenerative futures at the University of the Sunshine Coast, and she's been published in leading international journals on subjects including regenerative urbanism, net positive precincts, and future studies. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thanks, Simon, and hi, everyone. It's so lovely to be here. And as Bridie so beautifully ended her speech with, we are already on the green and gold runway to 2032. Actually, I just realised I don't have the clicker, Simon, if you wouldn't mind passing that would be great. And as a host region, we're in the really fortunate position of having a 10-year runway rather than the standard 7 experienced by most host cities. And so it's really clear that Brisbane 2032 Olympics and Paralympic Games have the potential to be catalytic for the region, not just in terms of climate positivity, but of course in terms of accessibility, mobility, and in fact across all of the themes of our lovely SDG table markers here today. But I'd like to encourage you, as we think about what's possible for 2032, to broaden your thinking out even further, to really take a futures mindset, put yourself in 2042 and beyond, and think about what's possible for the 10 years post the Games and beyond. What would true legacy look like across the breadth of what we call sustainability if we collectively mobilise now? Because delivering a climate positive and sustainable Games is really important, but really what's more important is how can we use this as a lever to achieve really significant transformation for Brisbane, for Southeast Queensland and for the region. So as we talked collectively on our call last week as we were preparing for this session, legacy's already started and we are all going to play a part in delivering it. So through the bid process, as you may all be aware, the Games partners really committed to this notion of a legacy-led Games, and the Brisbane 2032 Legacy Plan will clearly define and flesh out how we take advantage of this 10-year opportunity to drive not only environmental, but obviously economic, social, cultural, mobility outcomes across the region and in particular for the built environment. So yes, the opportunities are significant and I think we can all agree with that, but so's the scale, and it's really useful I think to start to have some frameworks where we can drill down into what the different elements of a sustainable legacy for Brisbane 2032 might look like. So the ISC sustainability priorities on the screen there provide quite a useful framework I think to start this thinking, and not only that, also are really useful in terms of reporting on our transformative progress given their strong linkages to the UN SDGs. So obviously climate is a core priority and I'll touch on that a little bit more later. Workforce, how do we really integrate early planning around concepts of workforce for the Games itself, but also in terms of really fast-forwarding initiatives around modern slavery, human rights, and accessible workforces. What does it mean for mobility, transport, accessibility? And I think, you know, it's a really broad theme, mobility, because it brings in those really important themes we've heard Simon and Bridie so beautifully describe. And in terms of its relationship with climate and emissions, some of the biggest chunk of the emissions pie really for the Games themselves will be from those spectator emissions. So how do we work in the 10 years that we've got to investigate possibilities in that space? Obviously responsible sourcing and the circular economy is a massive opportunity, but one that can only be collectively delivered. And of course infrastructure and natural sites. What is the thinking we need to do now for infrastructure and natural sites, and thinking about how those two things interact to ensure legacy benefits for the Games? But I think what's really important, and not news to anyone in this room, is a systematic lens is really what we require, both across these priorities, but also across everything we do to prepare for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. You know, we really need to apply a systems lens when we look at infrastructure, for example, certainly not viewing each project in isolation, but looking at all of the infrastructure projects across a portfolio of possibilities. And I think what I'd really like to stress here, though, is regeneration, sustainability, making really transformative progress here. It has to be done contextually. What's sustainable for LA, for Paris, is not necessarily so for Brisbane. So how do we bring in the uniquely Southeast Queensland or Queensland story to help us frame our vision for what legacy looks like? And I think my personal view is we have a really wonderful opportunity to not only be First Nations inclusive in this process, but First Nations led, and to really learn from and integrate the wisdom that First Nations people have shown in terms of sustainable practices over the millennia. So really briefly, and this is probably something that you're all aware of, the climate positivity commitments are really important, but they need to be considered and contextualised within the broader sustainability, accessibility priorities for the Games. So they get kind of the headlines, but in and of itself, they do not a sustainable Games deliver. So we just need to make sure that they're contextualised more broadly. Having said that, the Games have committed to being climate positive and that they'll reduce emissions as much as possible, offset more than the residual, and that's really fantastic. A lot of that work will clearly fit in the remit of the OCOG, however. But what I really wanted to touch on now is this third pillar that we committed to as Games partners in the bid process, and that's the ambition to inspire global ambition and action, innovation and collaboration to create lasting change. And that's where the focus now really has to be. How can we set up a really clear vision for what that looks like, but also mechanisms that we can work together as government, industry, and representative bodies to actually enable that to come to the fore. Okay, just really briefly, this is the ISC definition of legacy. And I just wanted to put this up because I think it really reminds us that setting that clear vision from the outset and getting a collective understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve here is what's really important. And I think that was also illustrated by Simon and Bridie, that early thinking has to be really clear so that we're all on a consistent pathway to change. But I guess the question is, how do we create a uniquely Queensland legacy for the Games? Andrew Liveris the other day talked about not only creating a brand for Brisbane 2032, but a symbol for the future. And I think the answer to that for me is that this process needs to involve as many voices as possible, and we need to continue to ask ourselves as Games partners, who's not in the room, and how can we make sure that we address that? Okay, this is just a really brief slide that I wanted to touch on in terms of approaches to engagement for the Games, and where certainly the Department of Environment and Science and the Queensland Government is really thinking and focusing on. So particularly with the really big, complex challenges that we face around the circular economy and around transforming the market to be ready to deliver on a climate positive, sustainable and accessible Olympic and Paralympic Games, that's something that no individual layer of government, no individual body full stop can deliver it by themselves, and nor is that the most effective way. So we're really looking at the moment about how do we use a collective impact approach to bring together the leaders across all sectors to deliver on these more complex priorities. What does that mean for circular economy, for infrastructure, and for some of the really key challenges around particularly sustainable tourism and aviation? So I just encourage you to keep your eye out for opportunities for being involved in that process, because it's going to be a collective approach. And in the bid process, actually, there was specific reference to leading examples of that nationally in Australia that already exist, that some of you might be aware of. The Sustainable Destinations Partnership, for example, out of the City of Sydney was referenced through that bid process. So how do we look at what's already being done well by potentially members in this room and really leverage that and grow that and contextualise that for Brisbane 2032? So some of you may also be familiar with this diagram. This is a diagram summarising the ISC's new norm agenda. So essentially, the new norm is a set of 118 reforms that reimagine how the Games are delivered. So clearly looking to reduce costs, complexity, risk, and most importantly, in my view, waste, and to add flexibility to encourage partnership, to embed sustainability in all things, and to increase efficiency. And I think this new norm agenda and working with the IOC through the OCOG is going to be an extremely valuable process for all of us involved in Brisbane 2032 to really maximise a new way of thinking about mega events. The runway isn't just the Olympics. We've got so many global events coming to Australia in the lead up. How do we apply this thinking to those? And how do we test concepts and innovate along that runway process? So the climate positive and sustainability commitments set us up for success, I think, for the Olympics and Paralympic Games. But the proof is really going to be in the pudding, and I think the really immediate foundational task is to make sure that we've got a really clear collective legacy vision for sustainability and associated issues, and then to start and to continue to work together to develop the strategies through the Games planning process and to deliver the initiatives that will enable those transformative outcomes to occur. Thank you.
Are we on? Excellent. So get your apps working, and I am sure that this room are really keen to engage with our panel. The IS Council is absolutely delighted to have been announced as the Infrastructure Sustainability Assurance Partner for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. And most of that excitement is coming from the fact that we advocate every day to measure what matters, and to start at the earliest possible stage at the outset with the end in mind. But I guess most importantly, we also really encourage setting a new standard and really stepping up and moving things beyond what we traditionally do. Now, Simon, you've got the benefit of experience, and that hindsight is really helpful for everyone here in the room. You spoke about, and we've heard a few times today, infrastructure is a system of systems, but part of that system in terms of bringing in the mobility and the event planning is also bringing along the supply chain. What can we do from your experience to bring the supply chain on board to think about legacy?
It's a tough question because I am the supply chain for lots of these events. And my experience was that my, if you like, purpose in the Games wasn't very clear at the start. I found myself advising on the Aquatic Centre in 2006, and my client was saying, well, you know, why have we got this? Why are we doing crowd safety now? We can leave that for a few more years, can't we? You know, so why are you here? And that for me was, I had to sort of explain what we could do. And so from my perspective, my experience from London was the people who are running the Games or the legacy are thinking about many, many things, governance and finance to start with, and they're not thinking about the detail of what needs to be happened, and they probably haven't done it before either. So it's beholden on those suppliers who know the business, can advocate, and have to spend time in convincing and persuading people that they can bring something new and it has real value. And as every consultant anywhere will say, you should have brought me in earlier. I mean, it is just a fact of life. We always say you should have been brought in earlier. And sometimes you have to invest a little in that to make the case. So it's obviously beholden on suppliers to make the case for why you can make a difference, not why you can get some money for a project, why you can make a difference to the ultimate objectives of the overall Games and legacy, and you're not doing it to build things.
Bridie, this morning, Nova Perez set us up in the most beautiful way, making it really clear through her story that sport has got the most tremendous opportunity to create change, and your story is no different. Being a Paralympian and having participated in the Games, you've also got the benefit of understanding what attendees might like. If you were talking to the design team, because many of them are here in the room, what would you be encouraging as the one thing that they really need to think about for attendees with mobility or any disability challenge?
It's a great question, Ainsley, and I draw back to one of my experiences when I was playing at the University of Illinois in the wheelchair basketball program, and how much effort we used to have to take to go to any venue. So we used to travel around America on a bus and transport all these wheelchairs on and off buses and go to venues. And there was this coach who spoke about how sport is usually the only time that a person with a disability feels that they're on an equal pathway. And for me, the experience of the Games, the Paralympic athletes will have the best experience ever. We know that. But imagine what it would be like if an attendee, really feels that they belong in that space. They deserve to be there. It's so often when you're a person with a disability, you're the other. You're the person that needs to take the other way, or it's like come around this way. Or you have to call ahead to an airline and let them know that you're coming on the plane. And so I would love for the design to think about what that is like to attend the venues, to be a part of the Games experience, and make sure that is equal to the experience of people without disabilities. And I think that starts by having more people with a disability involved in that design process.
And it's about making sure that people really feel welcome.
Welcome.
Be a great host.
Mm.
Now, we're really fortunate that Anonymous is not with us today. So I'm going to reward Isabel Ryan, I beg your pardon, Isabel. And she's asked a question for you, Kimberly. Does climate positive encompass scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions? If you're going to offset these emissions, what path will you take?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I think the thing with climate positivity is it's a term that has been thrown around quite a lot, and potentially there's not a clear and consistent common definition for that. But yes, it includes scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, and there will be an element of offsetting, particularly potentially around some of those travel-related emissions. And obviously the intention is to reduce those emissions as much as possible through careful planning and consideration in the lead up to the Games, and through really working hand in glove with OCOG and with the market on really innovative infrastructure and design solutions, particularly for the temporary overlay infrastructure, which is another really significant emitting factor for the Games. The offsetting approach will actually be really determining what that looks like will be quite collaborative. That's led by the OCOG in terms of their carbon budget negotiations with the ISC, but the Queensland Government and other Games partners in terms of local government and federal government will have a real role to play in influencing what that approach looks like. And I think so will industry, Ainsley, as well. How do we really draw from best practice approaches to ensure that any offsetting that really does have to happen has the maximum social and or environmental benefits associated with those approaches as possible?
Well, I think the audience will certainly be inspired to hear that, because when we get started, it is about boundaries. And the closer you get to the finish line, sometimes it's easier to get those boundaries a little tighter so that you get to the finish line in the best possible way. But starting now with that broad perspective, it's a really great place to start. Now, Michaela Gilchrist has asked a question of you, Simon. Her question is, the forecasting only mentioned the Olympics. How are the Paralympics considered?
Thank you for the question. Exactly at the same time. At the time we did that, we did the Paralympics forecast as well. And the Games delivery came a little bit later, but the forecasting from the start, it was part of the specification, and therefore was done in exactly the same way. From the athletes through to the spectators, everything was considered at the same time, and that was the broad message, I think, hopefully from presentation. The more planning you can do up front, the better the result will be.
Rolling on from the planning side is obviously then procurement. And Kimberly, maybe one for you. From the government's perspective, what is the intention to send strong signals about positive change through the procurement process?
Thank you, a great question. So I think there's a range of levers that we can really pull in terms of setting the market up and sending signals to the market with regards to procurement. Clearly, there's a regulatory lever and angle we can pull through, particularly the Queensland procurement policy, and we've already been working with our colleagues across government to ensure there's an emissions reduction target in the revised Queensland procurement policy. I think really clearly a lot of this will come from some of the games planning documentation as well, the responsible sourcing code and some of the really early pieces of strategy and that are delivered by the OCOG in conjunction with the government. And I think ensuring that those are consistent and clear with one another is really important. I think there's a real element for innovation as well. At the moment, we're running a low carbon accelerator program, and I think there's a real willingness and opportunity for government to put open questions out to the market for really innovative solutions, particularly for tracking supply chains, for really mapping those Scope 3 emissions associated with the lead up to the games and the games themselves. So I think taking that innovative lens is going to be really important. And of course, learning from those in industry who already do that well to help design and inform and hopefully deliver capacity building initiatives to smaller elements of the market. You know, we are going to need to engage SMEs to a really significant degree, and how do we enable and provide the tools and resources that they need early on to deliver on what will be contractual requirements to be commercial partners for the games.
Excellent. Well, we've got quite a few coming in, which is fantastic. The next one from Olivia, perhaps, Bridie, you might be able to help us with this. Would making accessible infrastructure the standard not fulfill the need to investigate and ensure correct implementation of accessibility? I guess we don't always have those design standards, and oftentimes we don't ask. What would you suggest?
It's a great question. I think the standard, meeting the standard is what we will need to do. But we don't know what we don't know. What is happening? We know that 1 in 5 Australians at the moment have a disability. And in 10 years' time, we might have technology that we don't have now that are going to make people's experiences of venues and mega events better than they are now. So I think that meeting the standards is amazing, and having leaders that promote those standards. But like Simon spoke about, I hope that there is someone involved in this process that is really adamant to set that bar really high with inclusion. Because what we saw in London was an experience for people with a disability like us, where we went, oh, we didn't expect that to happen. We didn't expect to be able to use the tube. And so while meeting the standards will definitely be great for accessibility, I just think we need to have a really open mind to what, in 10 years' time, with the technology we have, with the improvements that we have to society, how can we just continue to push that bar higher and higher with inclusion? And we might see things that we don't have now, or I guess access to now, but that we really want to make sure that when that technology emerges, we have that ready to go to make Brisbane 2032 the most successful games ever.
And Simon, one for you. How does designing crowd movement for Southeast Queensland differ from a location like Mecca?
Okay, so in Mecca, and thank you for the question, Mecca, there's a lot of focus on crowd safety and a little bit of security. And there's also, I don't know, less focus on sustainability. It's about addressing those first two things first and then capacity. Whereas I hope that and expect really that the Southeast Queensland will make it a Southeast Queensland Games and a special focus on that, which will include environment and visitor experience and others. And it's not that Mecca ignores things like visitor experience, but it's big fish to fry on making it safe. So it's really quite different to the Games. And interestingly, Mecca is not very accessible, as it happens. This, it should be super accessible because it, for religious purposes, it is a thing that most followers of the Islamic religion need to do in their lifetime. So it should be available to all. And they struggle to make it so because of the particular requirements, but also, frankly, probably not enough focus historically on making it like that way. So we don't want to do that for Southeast Queensland. And I think I want to build on Bridie's point in a slightly different way, saying we're thinking about new technology for to help people with disabilities. And I think we also, let's think about what we mean by disability. You know, I have to say, I look around and I'm looking like I'm one of the older people in the room. And unfortunately, over the years since I last did it, I've had to start wearing these. And the more we think about inclusivity, it's inclusive for all, including older people and others who perhaps don't think of themselves as having an accessibility problem, but they definitely do. And if you do that and make it work for accessible purposes, you make it work better for everyone. Frankly, it's a much nicer experience. And I would bear that in mind. And we certainly went above the standards. We have sometimes had to write the design guidelines. Wherever possible, we went above the standards, because as you get creative, sometimes you'd say it doesn't cost anything, sometimes it costs less.
So Kimberly, both you and Nova have moved the room, and we've got questions from both Holly and Keely, thank you both, about, I beg your pardon, Keely and Emma, about the opportunity for this Games to be First Nations led. Can you perhaps provide some insights into how this will be showcased, but also how our First Nations culture is going to be celebrated and shared with our visitors?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's such an important one. I think, as you may all be aware, there's currently a process underway to develop the branding and the story, the narrative around the Games. And I think there's a really strong desire on behalf of the OCOG, and certainly on behalf of the government, that is fundamentally underpinned by a First Nations perspective. So I think that's one really clear initial opportunity. I think as we work towards developing the really, to be honest, the complex governance around delivery of something as big as this, there is a tendency to silo up different elements of focus into specific, working groups or steering committees and the like, and to separate accessibility from environmental sustainability from First Nations perspective. So I think it's going to be really about, in terms of the runway to 2032, looking for those opportunities to integrate First Nations perspectives across everything that is done, and certainly the commitment in the bid to do that was really clear and really welcome from the IOC's perspective. In terms of storytelling, I think that storytelling really needs to start now, and it really needs to inform not only the event itself, but we're in a process moving towards treaty in Queensland. How can we work hand in glove with that process to ensure that anything we do for the Games is treaty aligned, is treaty compatible, and I think most importantly is informed directly from our First Nations citizens of Queensland and beyond, because I think creating those connections early will be really important. And I look forward to seeing what comes out of the legacy strategy work, because I think that will also set some really clear markers along the runway to 2032, where we can collectively come together to showcase what that First Nations wisdom and input into 2032 looks like.
Great. Well, I'm going to wrap up with one last question, because it's a common thread that's been asked by two Haleys as well as Simone, and they're all interested in capacity building and how we bring along SMEs and some of the local local community and local suppliers to actually become part of the Games, and also importantly set up a learning legacy from this Games and how that might extend. So maybe to sum up, any of your thoughts as we close this panel, what should we do to make this a genuine capacity building experience where people have a learning journey that we can perhaps gift to the next Games?
It's a great, excuse me, it's a great question, and particularly as we touched on earlier, the circular economy focus is really strong for Brisbane 2032, and that involves suppliers, businesses of all shapes and sizes, clearly. I think at the really initial stages, we're starting to leverage existing engagement that we have with SMEs, and in Queensland that's really through strong partnerships with the Chamber of Commerce and Industry and other bodies, where we've actually got really significant reach currently to get input from those SMEs around what their readiness for a climate positive games is, and to make sure that we're developing further capacity buildings based on data, not assumptions, and really leveraging those existing programs now with a 2032 lens. But clearly there's a long way to go, and I think there's opportunity for some real innovation there. And I think from my perspective, working with the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur and others to examine more innovative and, quite frankly, less traditionally government ways of engaging that sector is going to be a real opportunity for us. So, but again, there are people in industry that also probably have a lot of these, clearly have a lot of these answers already. So I think it's about us also, as games delivery partners, looking at what works well already and delivering and translating that into capacity building mechanisms and resources to support SMEs.
Thank you. Bridie, your thoughts or closing comments?
Closing comments. Well, one of the really exciting opportunities that came up at the end of last year was to chair the Sunshine Coast Community Reference Group, where we developed, Sunshine Coast Council developed a community reference group that contributed the voices of all different people on the Sunshine Coast who represented a different group. So we had everything from arts and culture. We wanted a young person on the committee, Olympians, Paralympians. We had the First Nations voice. And coming together as a legacy group, the ideas and the opportunities that came up were really exciting. So I think similar groups bringing together think tanks and just people sharing ideas and somehow getting that back to OCOG. We had the opportunity as a reference group to meet with Andrew Liveris last week, and it was just about seeing what's already out there, because such great things are already happening in southeast Queensland. So if we can get people in the room talking more and more in these first few years that are, I guess, the gift, the extra 3 years, I think that would be fantastic.
Simon, your closing thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm going to build a little on Bridie's and Kimberly's talk there, which is that for me in London, it was a fantastic time, best time of my working life, because you had a common purpose, doing something that really mattered to you at home. But one of the other reasons it was a fantastic time was because I sat in a room, sometimes a very big room like this, a work environment, and we kept talking to people about things that hitherto I didn't know about. And in London, it was about water engineering for the Olympic Park, and it made us make different decisions. And what I'm getting to there is that because we were in a room together, and I think you've got a regional games with lots of different government departments and different functions together, some thought needs to be given to how to bring groups in with brilliant ideas who understand each other, because you'll play off it, and it will not be the meeting that you go to, it will be the conversation where you're walking out of the meeting, talking to somebody on there, and it's something you overhear behind you, go, oh, I didn't know that, well, let me tell you about this is what we're doing. And so that exchange of informal information and formal information will lead to a better result, particularly if it's focused to capacity building and listening to, in this case, First Nation requirements. But it will be the other things as well. But if you can find a way to have an office with everybody, and we all know Teams and Zoom are different to meeting in person. And for this kind of exercise that's time-bound and you need creativity, being in the same room will be important. Maybe that's unpopular, but I think that's my view.
Thank you, Simon. And there is no such thing as a free lunch. So we have shared this conversation today to get you warmed up for our workshop tomorrow afternoon so that we can together start ideating on some of these concepts, document them and share them back.
Great.
Got me. Sorry, Mr. Sandman, that was just to check you're still awake. What can I say? That was amazing. I feel like all the pressure is shifted to me because I'm the one who's going to have to try and incorporate all of that fantastic content. And just so you know, I was listening. What I took away was my job is to frame a treaty-compatible legacy through a Queensland lens, planning for beyond the Games, yet for the Games at the same time, to achieve universality that Bridie spoke of, taking a systems approach to our portfolio of opportunity, some of which is going to be ably assured by our infrastructure sustainability partner. How did I do? It only remains for me to, on your behalf, thank very much Dr. Bridie Keane, Simon, Kimberly, and of course, Ainsley. You got the best job. Thank you very much. Please give them a big hand. Now, we're going to just take a little bit of organisation. So whilst our guests make their way from the stage, can I find Jason in the audience somewhere? Excellent, thank you very much. So Jason is going to come and take over, giving us a bit of an overview of the upcoming session. And Jason is from our session partner, Jacobs, so we need to thank them, as well as, you see, you're not a quick learner. You should have come up this way. It was a one-on, one-off system. Excellent. Please give Jason a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Impact and Innovation session brought to you in partnership by Jacobs. I'm your host, Jason Smith, an Associate Sustainability Consultant with Jacobs, based out of the Brisbane office. Given my role in providing sustainability services, and in fact the role we all play in the delivery of sustainable infrastructure, I'm very excited to host this session where you'll have the opportunity to hear about some of the leading tools and technologies that drive positive change and create legacy for a better tomorrow. To make sure you get the most out of listening and engaging with the presenters we have coming up this afternoon, I just want to quickly run through how we're going to navigate through the session. So in total, we've got 6 fantastic and energetic presenters who will introduce themselves on stage shortly, each providing quick-fire pitch on their impactful solution. Once each of them have delivered their quick-fire pitch, they will position themselves next door at the exhibition hall at their designated space, and you'll get to learn a little bit more about their key topic that they've got to speak on. There will be a total of 4 rotations of their in-depth presentations. So based on your area of interest and given the role you have in delivering sustainable infrastructure, please use the upcoming quick-fire pitches to decide on which of the 4 out of the 6 you'd like to attend. Before I invite the presenters on stage, I'd just like to say a few words to give you a bit of a flavour of who you're about to meet and some of their backgrounds. First up, we have Melanie Forbes. Melanie is the director of the Outdoor Gallery on the Outback Way. Melanie will be showcasing how engagement with community and culture has resulted in the Outback Gallery, which creates a deconstructed viewing experience for travellers along the Plenty Highway. Next up, we have Peter Galvin. He is the Executive Chairman and CEO of Black Stump Technologies, who offer rapid deployable solutions that provide renewable energy options across many different industries, including the infrastructure sector. Peter will be showcasing their sustainable technologies and solutions that offer benefits across the triple bottom line. Brad Hocking is a customer experience team lead at Copperleaf Technologies. Brad provides experience and leadership on projects utilizing a variety of skill sets, including financial and risk management, systems engineering, data analytics, and software development, and we'll be walking you through how these can contribute to a robust asset management system. Davina Smith, who is a pavements engineer with Stabilised Pavements of Australia. Davina's role is focused on the stabilisation solutions that promote sustainability benefits. So look forward to hearing more about Davina's role in the promotion of technologies leading road rehabilitation and reconstruction across pavement types. We'll also have Andre Gobert. He is the head of recycling solutions at Boral and has been leading their circular economy services. Andre will be presenting about their new circular materials solutions and the value these bring to customers and the society, some of the challenges and key requirements to ensure their smooth implementation. Will Jones-McCoy is the Technical Director for Co-Design and Social Value Leader for Jacobs. Will is active in the development of the social value thinking and will be showcasing how creative design thinking methods unlock generational legacies for both people and places. So as you can see, we've got an excellent variety of topics that will be presented to you shortly. We really want to get we really want you to get the most out of discovering the impactful solutions the presenters will be showcasing. So just a little friendly request that during our rotations next door, you'll have about a minute or so before the next in-depth presentation starts. So please be mindful of time in allowing you sufficient time to move on to your next desired presenter. Myself and the ISC staff will be along with you the entire way to help you navigate around the room, and we'll be calling time when it's time to rotate onto the next one. Okay, I think that's enough from me at this stage. Just two friendly reminders again. Just one is that after these quickfire sessions, we will be moving next door, where we were having a bite to eat earlier. And the second reminder is, out of the 6 presenters, you will have the opportunity to hear from 4 of them in more detail next door. So first onto the stage, I'd like to invite Melanie Forbes.
So the timer starts now. Or? I acknowledge and pay my respects to the Kabi Kabi people, traditional owners of the country on which we are standing. I'm Melanie Forbes, Director of the Outdoor Gallery Outback Way, which links the physical asset of the highway to the communities it connects and serves. Starting about an hour and a half from Alice Springs on the road to the Queensland border, the gallery is 14 double-sided billboards of local artwork featured along a 111-kilometre stretch of the Plenty Highway. The 28 artworks showcased were sourced via an expression of interest from remote and regional artists in the NT, Queensland and WA, from towns, communities, art centres and studios close to or nearby the Outback Way. But the Outback Way is not just a road, and the Outdoor Gallery is not just a gallery. It is the development of cultural infrastructure in tandem with the sealing of the 2,700 kilometres of roads and highways that make up the Outback Way, a large physical infrastructure asset. So it's about bringing places to life, because effective cultural infrastructure connects spaces, physical assets and technologies with people. Effective cultural infrastructure stimulates growth for the creative, knowledge, and innovation economies. Effective cultural infrastructure enables economic, cultural, creative, and social opportunities. It all starts with intention and knowing how to maximise your community engagement. This model can be replicated, it can be scaled up or down, it can be replicated and adapted, scaled up and down. This model builds relationships and connections across cultures, groups, and sectors. It emphasises inclusivity, and it establishes meaningful local support, and it embeds belonging and place by leveraging large infrastructure projects. By developing a sense of place and belonging, the building blocks of an inclusive and sustainable community are embedded. As cultural infrastructure, the Outdoor Gallery needed a cultural bottom line. And our playbook looks like this. So let's connect today about your investing in your project's cultural bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Next on stage, I'd welcome Peter Galvin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Galvin from Blackstump Technologies. Surely the question for everyone in this room today is, how will you get to net zero? We would say that that is not possible without the removal of diesel from your businesses. And here's how. Many of you, of course, have already started this journey. What we're finding currently in the marketplace is that there is a balancing between sustainability and commercial outcomes. Within that context, here's what our technologies are achieving right now. A 90% reduction in CO2 emissions, 100% is achievable now. Up to 73% reduction in operating costs, again, 100% is achievable now. And 100% reliability. Our technologies are smart, they're integrated, and they don't break down. Our rapidly deployable solutions are available now in all site conditions, whether that be a greenfield infrastructure site or whether that be a space-constrained construction site, whether that be 100% off-grid or a grid-tied site, across the whole of Australia and indeed globally. Let's have a look at some examples. Here's a renewable energy UPS system operating at the Newell Highway. Here's a grid-tied system being used by the Level Crossing Removal Authority in Victoria. Here's a recently manufactured space-constrained 20-foot UPS system. And here's our 10-foot space-constrained UPS system currently being used by McConnell Dowell on a major road infrastructure project in Victoria. So why Blackstump? Well, we're technology specialists and we've had 40 years experience in complex engineering. And that means, and this is the magic bit, that our technology works 365 days a year, 24/7 in all conditions. And we've learned about the people too. We've learned how to teach your people how to interact with this new technology. But please, don't just take my word for it. Talk to many of the people who are here in the room today using our technology. Thank you for listening. Come and hear some more. Thank you.
Fascinating, Peter. Thank you very much. Next on stage, I'd like to welcome Brad Hocking.
Hi, everyone. Good to go. Okay. So, just give me a minute. I feel like I'm really wasting a bit of this presentation. It's kind of embarrassing. I'm going to be wasting about 26% of it. You know what would be even more embarrassing? Wasting 26% of your annual CapEx budget every year and still not hitting your sustainability targets. And why is that relevant? The study of Copperleaf clients has shown that after implementing our system, they on average achieve a 26% efficiency gain on their infrastructure projects. The way that we achieve this is through implementing a systematic value-based decision-making framework, which is really just a fancy way of saying we help our clients work out what projects to do and when. This journey starts by firstly identifying what value means to the organisation, then aligning the different value criteria to a common economic scale, valuing all their potential investments according to this scale, and then optimising it within our solution. This is all made possible by a value framework, which Bodwin talked about briefly earlier today. This takes your potential investments and links them to your strategic objectives through quantifiable value measures. Now, these might be risk reduction, it could be financial or non-financial benefits, it could be service measures and more. It is this value framework which enables us to compare apples with pears. It enables us to compare a revenue-generating project with a project that will reduce bushfire risk and compare it to a project that will help us hit our emissions targets. Now, this all sounds pretty great, but I'm sure there are some that think, well, we won't be able to do that with us right now. I'd like to talk through some of those thoughts and why I think that they might be rubbish. Firstly, data cleansing. Your data might be as dirty as brown coal, but let's face it, it's never going to be perfect. We need to take what you've got, put it to work, and then we'll improve it as time goes by. Top-down strategies are great, but geez, they can be fluffy. So what we would advocate for is a middle-out strategy. You know what you want to do. Let's link it to your strategic objectives and head towards them. You don't understand how to value those different types of investments? That's what our value framework is for. And at the very minimum, we can be qualitatively correct and quantitatively close. Change fatigue. It happens to us all. We hate it. A process like this should be an evolution of the way you're currently working, not some horrible software revolution. So if you're keen to learn more about Copperleaf, please come and visit me at my booth. And if you're not keen at all, come anyway, because we've got chocolate and we'll bribe you with that. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Davina Smith onto stage.
Okay, so we can start? Okay, so what I'm here to talk about today is road rehabilitation, and specifically stabilisation, in situ stabilisation. So if you are responsible for your road assets, if you are a designer, if you work in local government, if you work for state road authorities, if you have anything to do with road infrastructure, this is what should interest you. You can play the video, it's right to go. I just wanted this to go on in the background. And it's on mute. I basically want you to look at me and listen to me though. So what Stabilised Pavements of Australia have done is introduced a new process and machinery for rehabilitating road pavements. So in situ stabilisation isn't new. You may have heard of it in TMR's presentation this morning about one of the ways that it's being resilient and sustainable for road rehabilitation. But what we've done is introduced new plant and machinery, this paver-laid in situ recycling process. So why import new materials, even recycled materials, into your road pavement if all the materials that you need for a road are already there? So these are some examples of projects that we've already done. The process that we are undertaking here is called paver-laid in situ recycling. Hopefully there are some pavement nerds out there who can appreciate this, but you recycle the in situ material all in place, and then you offload it into the paver, and then you place it as a paver-laid finish at the back of the paver. We have been delivering projects across the country, and our mission is to convert as many projects from deep lift asphalt replacement, crushed rock granule replacement, into foamed asphalt pavements, which are 100% recycled pavements using the existing materials. And some of the key benefits of this process are the down cutting process, which improves gradation of the materials, also the cutting width of the recycler itself, as it is the biggest profiler in the world, spans 3.2, 3.6 and 3.8 metres, in addition to the paver at the back being able to place the material at 6 metres wide, which is absolutely mind-blowing. So we can do projects in 2 passes. The project that was Northbourne Avenue was originally scheduled for 26 weeks using conventional construction methods. The project manager came to us and said, "You must help us." So we spoke to the consultant, we did some designing, we helped get a construction program in place, and it was down to 10 days. So I really want to share with you more. There's only 3 minutes in this talk for me, but I'm at the booth and I'd love to see you there.
Thank you, Davina. Next on stage, we've got Andre Gobet.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. First of all, I'll say on behalf of Borough, we are honored with the opportunity to share with you today a little bit of what we are doing with our new service, the Circular Material Solution, which is a new service offering that we've been bringing to the market over the past 12 months. Got some good wins and delivering results on sustainability, circular economy outcomes, project management optimization, and cost optimization in construction projects. And I suppose I should go around how does it work, what is it, and what are the values that we get from it. So basically what it does is it leverages the fact that within our core products of concrete, asphalt, and quarries, we can include recycled content, construction and demolition recycled content into the mix of those products, and still deliver the performance that you need on your construction project. So it leverages that along with the fact that Borough already is one of the largest recyclers of construction and demolition and excavation waste in the country, with nearly 3 million tons of those materials being recycled through our 12 sites in New South Wales, Victoria, another site coming up here in Queensland at Stapleton. So leverage those two things, bring them together to broaden Borough's engagements on the construction projects beyond that one directional from our operations supplying the products to the project into more of a two-directional or circular, I should say, where we not only supply the materials to the project, but also we manage the construction and demolition and excavation materials that come off the project in the early stages, bring those into our recycling sites, and supply back into the project. So we brought a quick diagram here that sort of goes step by step. So important is engaging early during the design phase so that we identify the performance requirements you have of the products that will be going into the project, as well as the bill of materials that will be coming off the project. And in identifying those, we can then, through the demolition excavation stage, bring the concrete brick excavation materials into our recycling sites, recycle them, and then either supply back directly to the project or into our manufacturing facilities where we, again, will supply for the during construction phase, and that loop keeps going. So appreciate that's a bit of a detailed diagram there. We brought a simplified and more circular one, which sort of steps through the same stages. Again, the important thing, engaging early during design, and in doing that, we can achieve not only the sustainability outcomes, but also project management efficiency and cost optimization. So I'll leave it there before I run out of time. I just want the last thing to acknowledge and say a big thanks to all the customers that have already started implementing it and help us prove the value and as such accelerate the rollouts over the past 12 months. So thanks everyone.
Next on stage, I'd like to welcome Rill Jones-McCoy.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for having me. I don't have a movie, you are actually my medium today. So I'm going to just start with a little story, and I'd like you to see how you feel when I tell you this story. Does anyone in the room understand that? I'm figuring there might be one person who can read sign language. So I just spoke in Australian Sign Language, and what I said was in 2005, I was the Australian team interpreter for the Deaf Olympics. You might not have heard of the Deaf Olympics, but they started in 1924 as the International Silent Games. And they're actually the most continuing games and now endorsed by the IOC as an Olympic Federation group. So they were started to actually share globally between deaf communities to actually see how they could accelerate inclusion and access. And they actually have continued to this day, and the 100-year anniversary is in 2024. Those games have massively accelerated inclusion and access through technology, through social aspects, through a whole heap of elements. And I'm sure that you're all incredibly inspired by the last presentation and starting to think about legacy ideas. So what I would like to present is your opportunity to be part of that. So in the next little session, I'm going to be running a high-speed design thinking workshop. And what I'm interested in is us actually collaborating. So innovation's not an event, it's not a workshop, it's actually a process where we keep on building and expanding ideas. And I'm sure when you heard that last presentation that you started to think, oh yeah, like UN SDGs, there's legacy, there's 10+10, there's so many concepts around. And this room is full of lots of different professionals. I'm sure we've got engineers, planners, sustainability scientists, professionals, strategists, policy people, such a mix. So what opportunity we've got at the moment to come together and actually accelerate a bit of thinking and create some legacy thinking from today, just from the things that you've heard. So this workshop will be 8 minutes, so very high speed, not high commitment, and you can rotate out, but you can take something away that actually generates a bit more of your thinking. So I invite you to join me afterwards and come along for 8 minutes of your life. Oh, someone's got some sign language there. And I will also just explain something about progress too. When I signed at the beginning, I signed Australia. That was the original sign for Australia, which was kind of convicts being dropped in Australia. Tells you. But the sign has actually changed, and now this is Queensland, and you actually sign that, and that's Uluru. So I guess I thought that's kind of a good sign of progress and legacy and creation of inclusion, including accessibility and our First Nations people. So I think we can all be part of that kind of dream and legacy creation for the Brisbane 2032 Olympic and Paralympic Games. So I hope I see you in the workshop, and all you need to bring is a pen and your enthusiasm. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you there for all the short pitches from each of the presenters. So at this stage, you should have a pretty good understanding of the 4 presenters that you want to hear about in more detail. So at this moment, we'll get our running shoes on and pop on over to the next door, the expo hall. So see you over there.